It wasn't supposed to be seen, unofficial, unspoken, and far from the public eye. But behind the scenes, it was a symbol of something far more dangerous.
And it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels.
A covert alliance between the United States and Mexico, quietly built to hunt down and dismantle the most violent cartels in the Western Hemisphere. Today, the cartels are not fighting the U.S. military. They're facing a well-organized network of civilian intelligence agents, legally protected, strategically trained, and backed by hundreds of millions of dollars in classified funding every year. This is not a war shown on live TV. There are no breaking news alerts, no patriotic speeches. But people still bleed, criminal networks still collapse, and agents without uniforms continue to vanish deep inside the most dangerous territories in Mexico. So, how did America manage to send more than 100 civilian agents into a foreign country without triggering a diplomatic crisis? Who gave them permission to build secret bases just miles away from cartel strongholds? And why has the Trump administration never told the American people about these missions? The United States has quietly placed over 100 federal agents on the ground inside Mexico. These are not troops or special operations soldiers. They are civilian intelligence officers from the DEA, FBI, and CIA, operating under diplomatic cover and working out of 11 secret offices positioned near cartel hotspots along the border. From these bases, they carry out surveillance, guide raids, and help track down the most powerful cartel leaders, often without ever appearing in public. These missions operate under the legal protection of the 1961 Vienna Convention, which allows registered foreign personnel to work on foreign soil in limited roles. But in reality, these agents do much more than observe. They are deeply embedded in operations. They gather live intelligence, intercept cartel communications, and relay targeting data to Mexican security teams. In certain cases, they assist in planning the raids themselves. An internal DEA budget document revealed that over $400 million per year is allocated to support these international efforts. A large portion goes directly into Mexico, funding these covert missions with the approval of both governments, yet with zero public visibility. What's most striking is how little the public knows. Neither Washington nor Mexico City talks openly about these missions. There are no press releases, no news briefings, and certainly no images. The goal is to keep everything quiet. In Mexico, the idea of U.S. agents operating on sovereign territory remains highly sensitive. In the U.S., these actions could spark legal and political debate, especially since they're not publicly debated in Congress. And yet, despite the secrecy, the mission has continued for years. These agents operate in some of the most dangerous cartel-controlled areas. They don't wear uniforms. They don't carry American flags. But they represent a powerful, often invisible hand guiding the war on drugs. It's a modern battlefield shaped not by tanks or bombs, but by wiretaps, satellites, and data streams. During the Trump administration, these efforts stayed in the shadows. While President Trump often spoke of crushing the cartels and promoted harsh border policies, he never addressed the fact that America already had teams operating inside Mexico. There were no updates, no policy disclosures, just quiet budgets and silent escalation. These American agents were doing the real work. They didn't make speeches. They didn't campaign. They tracked kingpins, mapped cartel networks, and fed intelligence into joint operations. Their impact was real, even if it remained unspoken. But secrets don't last forever. Even the most silent missions can erupt into the public eye, especially when things go wrong, or when gunfire breaks out in the middle of a city. That's exactly what happened when one of Mexico's most feared drug lords was tracked down in broad daylight, and a 90-minute shootout exposed the full scale of U.S. involvement. How a man known as the boss of bosses was brought down in one of the most intense operations of the U.S.-Mexico cartel war. In December 2009, one of the most dangerous cartel bosses in Mexico, Arturo Beltran Leyva, finally made a mistake. After months of silence, he used his encrypted BlackBerry. That single action gave U.S. intelligence agencies exactly what they needed. DEA and CIA teams picked up the signal and quickly pinpointed his location. He was hiding in a luxury apartment complex in Cuernavaca, a city not far from Mexico City. Instead of sending in American special forces, the U.S. chose to stay in the background. This wasn't going to be a military operation. It was going to be a joint strike, led by Mexican Marines but powered by American data. Satellite tracking, phone intercepts, and field-level coordination were all provided in real time by American handlers. This is how the United States wages war without sending troops. American agents directed the mission remotely, tracking Beltran's every move, while trusted Mexican units closed in for the kill. This wasn't a Hollywood operation. It was quiet, fast, and brutal. As night fell, more than 200 elite Mexican Marines took position around the apartment tower. They brought tanks, helicopters, and heavy weapons. Cartel gunmen were inside the building, heavily armed with grenades and rifles. The moment the Marines approached, the shooting started. What followed was one of the longest urban gunfights in the history of Mexico's drug war. Grenades were thrown down stairwells. Rifle fire echoed through the high-rise. Marines were given the order to go weapons-free. After 90 minutes of intense combat, several cartel members were dead. One Mexican Marine, Corporal Melquisedec Angulo Cordova, was killed in the exchange. But the target had been located. Beltran was found in an upper-floor bedroom, cornered and wounded. He refused to surrender. According to reports, he tried to shoot his way out in a last-ditch effort. He was killed on the spot. What happened next sent shockwaves through the cartel world. After confirming the body, Mexican Marines reportedly covered Beltran's corpse with blood-soaked US dollar bills. It was a message, loud and clear. No amount of cash could save him. This was personal. The death of Corporal Cordova had turned a mission into a statement. The US didn't fire a single shot, but American intelligence made the operation possible. Signals intelligence, surveillance data, and live support helped guide Mexico's forces to their target. Beltran, the so-called boss of bosses, had fallen without a single American soldier ever crossing the border. This exposed a truth that few in Washington wanted to discuss. America was already deeply involved in Mexico's cartel war. It wasn't about walls or troops. It was about intelligence, influence, and selective force. And it was happening quietly, on the watch of a president who promised strength, but never addressed how much was happening in the shadows. The mission's success came with risks. By staying quiet, the US avoided headlines and political backlash. But that silence also meant that American agents continued to operate in dangerous territory without full protection. The partnership depended on loyalty from a small circle of trusted Mexican forces. And even that had limits. There were no public medals, no press briefings, and no words of thanks from the Trump administration. This was how America handled the war on drugs, secretly, remotely, and without accountability. But operating in the shadows has consequences. Without visibility, American agents became exposed, not just to cartel firepower, but to betrayal from inside Mexico's own police forces. When US agents became targets, and the men pulling the trigger were not cartel soldiers, but corrupt cops from Mexico's federal police. In August 2012, 2 American CIA officers were on a routine drive south of Mexico City. They were heading to a Mexican naval base for a scheduled meeting. The road was familiar, and their armored SUV had diplomatic plates. But just 40 miles outside the capital, something went horribly wrong. Suddenly, unmarked vehicles closed in from both sides. 12 men in civilian clothes stepped out, armed with AK-47s and tactical gear. Without warning, they opened fire. The agents inside the SUV tried to shout that they were US diplomats, but the attackers didn't stop. Over 150 bullets were fired into the armored vehicle in broad daylight. One CIA officer was hit in the leg, and the other narrowly avoided being killed. Their only chance was to call for help. Mexican Marines responded quickly and secured the area, but the damage had already been done. This wasn't a random cartel hit. It was something far more disturbing. At first, Mexican officials claimed it was a tragic case of mistaken identity. But when investigators looked closer, the story collapsed. The attackers weren't cartel hitmen. They were 12 active-duty Mexican federal police officers, all armed with unregistered weapons and wearing civilian clothing. These weren't rogue actors. They were part of an organized hit squad. The CIA agents were traveling in a clearly marked diplomatic vehicle, making it impossible to mistake them for criminals. Every sign pointed to a planned ambush, and to deep ties between law enforcement and organized crime. After a formal investigation, all 12 officers were arrested and charged. Their actions revealed what U.S. intelligence feared but rarely said aloud. Some elements of Mexico's police were no longer trustworthy. In fact, they were working hand in hand with the very cartels they were supposed to fight. What made this incident even more dangerous was how long it was kept quiet. There were no loud headlines in Washington. The Obama administration responded carefully, trying to protect diplomatic ties. And during the following years, especially under President Trump, this story was never mentioned again. But ignoring it didn't erase the reality. The ambush confirmed what agents on the ground had already learned. Not every badge in Mexico represents justice. For American operatives, it marked a turning point. After 2012, the U.S. started shifting away from working with federal police and focused more on vetted military units like the Mexican Navy. This decision changed the structure of America's covert war in Mexico. Intelligence sharing became tighter, background checks became stricter, and trust was no longer given, only earned. But the ambush also raised bigger questions. How many more officers were compromised? How deep did cartel influence go? The 2012 ambush wasn't just a failed attack, it was a signal, a warning that even protected American agents were vulnerable. It also showed how far the cartels had reached inside Mexico's government structures. No amount of funding or training could fix a broken system if corruption wasn't rooted out at the top. Yet, under Trump, this issue received little attention. His speeches focused on border walls and drug seizures, not on cleaning up America's intelligence partnerships. There was no press briefing about how 2 CIA officers were nearly killed by Mexican police. No statement, no accountability, just silence. But silence has consequences. For agents operating inside Mexico, this meant they had to take more risks, trust fewer people, and constantly look over their shoulders, even when working with supposed allies. But this wasn't the first betrayal. 3 decades earlier, a DEA agent paid the ultimate price. And that moment lit the fuse for an entirely different kind of war. The brutal death of DEA agent Enrique "Kiki" Camarena in 1985 was not just a tragedy, it was a turning point. It exposed the depth of cartel influence in Mexico and forced the United States to respond with unprecedented force. Camarena's murder triggered a shift in U.S. strategy, from quiet cooperation to bold, unilateral action. Camarena had been tracking the Guadalajara cartel, one of the most powerful drug empires at the time. His investigations threatened billion-dollar operations and high-ranking allies both inside and outside Mexico. In February 1985, Camarena was kidnapped in broad daylight. He was held for over 30 hours, during which he was brutally tortured. Reports confirmed that he was beaten, burned, and injected with stimulants to prolong the pain. His body was later found buried in a shallow grave outside Guadalajara. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a message from the cartels, one that struck deep within U.S. agencies. The shock turned into fury, and that fury gave birth to something never seen before. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration launched a retaliatory campaign called Operation Leyenda, the largest homicide investigation in DEA history. But this operation wasn't limited to gathering evidence. Instead, it included covert missions on Mexican soil. Most controversial of all, the U.S. arranged the kidnapping of Dr. Humberto Alvarez Machain, a Mexican citizen accused of keeping Camarena alive during torture. He was snatched from his clinic in Guadalajara and flown to the U.S. for trial, without Mexico's permission. This act, a cross-border kidnapping authorized by U.S. officials, sparked a diplomatic firestorm. Mexico called it a violation of sovereignty. Critics accused Washington of acting like a rogue state. But inside the Reagan administration, this was viewed as necessary. The message was simple. If Mexican authorities couldn't, or wouldn't, deliver justice, the U.S. would do it alone. The move raised dangerous legal questions. When the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court in 1992, the court ruled that the abduction did not violate U.S. law, even though it broke international norms. This ruling gave Washington a green light to pursue cartel suspects anywhere, regardless of borders. That decision, some argue, has defined U.S. foreign enforcement ever since. But the deeper impact of Camarena's death was strategic. U.S. agencies realized they couldn't trust all their Mexican partners. Corruption had infected too many ranks, from local police to federal commanders. Intelligence leaks, betrayal, and infiltration became daily risks. That's when the idea behind Operation Leadership was born. Instead of fighting cartels with the help of the Mexican system, the U.S. would work to reshape that system from within. This meant building elite vetted units inside the Mexican Navy and Special Forces, groups that were trained, equipped, and closely monitored by the U.S. It also meant bypassing traditional law enforcement channels, especially those known to be compromised. This model, developed quietly over the next 2 decades, became the backbone of U.S. operations in Mexico. By focusing on carefully selected clean units and applying strict vetting processes, the U.S. hoped to regain an edge in a battlefield where trust was scarce. Camarena's story became a symbol of what happens when diplomacy fails and corruption takes hold. It proved that drug wars aren't just fought with bullets and raids. They're also battles of loyalty, secrecy, and justice. The scars of 1985 still shape the way America deals with Mexico's security apparatus today. To prevent another betrayal, the U.S. learned that the only way to win was to cleanse its partners from within. And that strategy began with a radical experiment in intelligence sharing. When the U.S. realized that working with Mexico's corrupt police was a dead end, the DEA launched a bold new plan. They created sensitive investigative units, SIUs, elite teams of Mexican officers who were handpicked, background-checked, and trained by the U.S. These officers didn't report to Mexico's broken system. They were loyal only to the DEA, and that made all the difference. The idea was to protect sensitive operations from being leaked. In the past, every time the DEA planned a raid, the cartel seemed to know in advance. But with the SIUs, that stopped. These agents operated under U.S. supervision, used secure equipment, and had their missions planned by American intelligence. In one case, an SIU unit in Jalisco successfully captured a high-ranking cartel logistics officer just hours after U.S. wiretaps intercepted his movements. No leaks, no delays, just results. SIUs became a model of trust and efficiency. They weren't just a tactical move, they were strategic, showing how the U.S. could fight corruption, not by cleaning up an entire system, but by building a new one inside it. Then, in 2021, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador made a stunning move. He shut down all SIU operations, claiming they were a threat to Mexico's national sovereignty. To the DEA, it was like turning off the only working radar in a storm. The decision broke years of careful cooperation and sent shockwaves through both governments. Almost immediately, the consequences became clear. With no more trusted units on the ground, the DEA had to pull back. Arrests dropped. Informants disappeared. Drug routes once monitored by SIUs became active again. Violence surged in places like Michoacán and Sinaloa. Without the SIUs, the DEA was back in the dark, operating blind in one of the world's most dangerous narco zones. Obrador's choice was political, but the results were deadly. By 2023, fentanyl overdoses in the U.S. had reached historic highs. Over 100,000 Americans died in a single year, much of it tied to Mexican cartels. And yet Washington responded with silence. Critics say the Biden administration let it happen, afraid to pressure Mexico and too cautious to stand up for programs that worked. Some U.S. officials defended the move, pointing out that a few SIU members were later caught helping cartels. But experts say these were outliers. The program as a whole had been effective. It had seized tons of cocaine, tracked cartel finances, and shut down smuggling routes. Dismantling it meant losing one of America's strongest weapons in the drug war. The bigger problem, many say, started in Washington. Trump's administration labeled cartels as terrorists, but failed to build long-term strategies. Biden came in promising better diplomacy, but when the SIUs were cut, he didn't fight to save them. This signaled weakness, not partnership. It told allies that America could be ignored, and told enemies that they could push harder. Now, with the DEA scaling back and Mexico tightening control, a vacuum has formed. And in that vacuum, new threats are growing. American agents are still active, but fewer, more cautious, and without their old network. Meanwhile, the cartels are more violent, more organized, and more politically connected than ever. Victor Vasquez isn't a politician or a soldier. He's a US DEA field agent, sharp, relentless, and one of America's most trusted weapons in the war against Mexican drug cartels. In a world drowning in corruption and violence, Vasquez became the symbol of what precise planning and unwavering discipline can achieve. He wasn't just a bystander in this war. He was the man who brought down Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, not once, but twice. The first breakthrough came in 2014. American intelligence pinpointed El Chapo's location, a seaside apartment in Mazatlan, fortified with escape tunnels and bodyguards. It could have been a disaster. But Vasquez, leading what would be known as Operation Black Swan, executed the mission like clockwork. In a matter of minutes, elite Mexican Marines, trained and guided by US intel, stormed the apartment. El Chapo didn't fire a shot. He was taken alive. No casualties, no leaks. A clean takedown that shocked even hardened observers. Vasquez's work remained in the shadows, but those on the inside knew. His mission planning was airtight. He picked trustworthy Mexican partners. He shut down any chance of a leak. That operation proved something few wanted to admit. When Washington chooses its allies carefully and leaves politics at the door, America can strike with surgical precision, even on foreign soil. El Chapo's arrest sparked global headlines, but the victory faded fast. In 2015, the drug lord pulled off another escape, this time crawling through a mile-long tunnel dug under his high-security prison cell. The world was stunned. It wasn't just a Mexican failure, it was a direct blow to US credibility. Americans asked, how could one man escape again? Where was the oversight? Back in Washington, the DEA needed a fix, and fast. So they called Vasquez. By early 2016, new intel pointed to Los Mochis, Sinaloa. El Chapo was hiding again. Vasquez flew back to Mexico, determined to finish the job. This time, the operation would be even more dangerous. During the raid, a gunfight broke out. 5 cartel guards were killed. 1 Mexican Marine was badly wounded, but Vasquez's team kept moving forward. El Chapo tried escaping through the city's sewer system, disappearing underground. But Vasquez wasn't chasing shadows. His team blocked every exit, forced him out, and arrested him again. Same fugitive, same outcome, same agent. This wasn't luck. It was professionalism and trust between Vasquez and his Mexican counterparts. In the eyes of Washington, Vasquez had become more than an agent. He was the future of cross-border operations, someone who understood Mexico's complex terrain and earned the respect of those who fought beside him. But success came at a cost, and Vasquez knew it better than anyone. Back in 2011, 3 years before Operation Black Swan, he was caught in a cartel ambush in San Luis Potosí while escorting a suspect. Gunmen opened fire on his convoy in broad daylight. 2 American agents were shot. One of them, Jaime Zapata, didn't survive. Vasquez barely made it out alive. He was injured, emotionally shaken, and forced to return to the US for medical treatment. But the mission had changed him. That attack was a wake-up call. It revealed the truth most Americans didn't want to hear. Agents like Vasquez weren't just enforcing laws. They were fighting in a war zone. The lines between law enforcement and battlefield had vanished. After the ambush, US policies shifted. Intelligence sharing became tighter. Mission planning was stricter. Protective measures around agents increased. Vasquez's scars became a symbol, a reminder of the price paid when strategy fails or politics gets in the way. Not every agent makes it home. One ambush in 2011 would force the US to change how it operates in Mexico forever. The death of ICE, Special Agent Jaime Zapata, in 2011 shocked both the American public and US intelligence agencies. Zapata was ambushed while on duty in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. Despite being inside an armored vehicle, he was shot over 80 times by cartel gunmen using military-grade weapons. This wasn't just another cartel killing, it was a direct hit against the US government. For years, the DEA had led most operations against drug cartels in Mexico. But Zapata's death exposed a critical weakness. America needed a more flexible, multi-mission force that could do more than chase drug smugglers. The mission had outgrown the DEA. In response, the US shifted its strategy and gave more responsibility to Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, a division within ICE. HSI had already been active, but after 2011, it took on a much bigger role. Unlike the DEA, which focused mostly on drugs, HSI tackled a wider range of crimes: human trafficking, arms smuggling, financial fraud, and money laundering. That broader scope made them more adaptable to the cartel's evolving tactics. America realized it couldn't win this war by only targeting cocaine or heroin. It had to go after the entire web of operations that kept the cartels alive. HSI quickly proved its value. They didn't grab headlines like the DEA. They didn't need to. While others chased kingpins, HSI followed the money. In Mexico City, they quietly helped bust one of the biggest cocaine seizures in the city's history. That single operation disrupted cartel routes and seized millions in cash and drugs, without a single shot fired. HSI's method was simple: intelligence first, action second. They built trust with Mexican officials, trained local forces, and used cyber tools to uncover secret trafficking routes. Over time, HSI became known as the Ghost Force. Cartels feared them, but never saw them coming. They worked from the shadows, uncovering financial networks and underground banking systems used by drug lords to hide their profits. And while DEA agents often made the news, HSI agents quietly reshaped the battlefield. They proved that silent operations could do more damage than bullets. Jaime Zapata's sacrifice wasn't forgotten. It became the reason the US fought smarter. HSI rose from that moment, not just as an agency, but as a symbol of how America had to evolve. When loud raids failed, HSI showed that quiet moves could change the entire game. The United States fights cartels in Mexico with a quiet force that looks more like a shadow army than a police unit. These agencies, supported by secret deals and trusted local partners, work behind the scenes to weaken criminal power. But this fragile cooperation shifts with every new president, every scandal, and every tragedy on both sides of the border. Still, without this alliance, cartels would have more room to grow, possibly even strong enough to influence politics in both countries. The threat isn't just drugs or violence. It's a system that runs like a hidden government with its own rules, money, and power. So now we face one key question. Can America win this fight without a real war? No soldiers, no tanks, just intelligence, drones, and agents in the shadows. In a battle against a silent empire like the cartels, is quiet force enough to protect democracy?